morning, everybody online as well. Good to have you all with us at 1111. I'm Tom McDermott. I'm the pastor of the 1111 community, and so glad that you've joined us online. So glad to see all of you all here this morning, and appreciate all the spacing out, and appreciate the wearing masks and all that stuff. It's interesting times that we're in. So, but we're glad to see you all here, and we're a remnant crowd here. And so I'm so glad that you're online watching as well. I'm really excited about the next few weeks of what's coming up, and I'll get into that in a little bit because of the series that I'm going to be engaged in and some of the people that are going to be joining me. But I'll talk about that in just a second. A couple of quick things. First of all, register your attendance online. You can see where to do that. Y'all can see where to do that here in your chairs, or if you want to go on the phone, you can do that on your phone. Register online. Give us let us know that you're here. Maybe give us a contact so we can make sure. Some of you keep telling me or continue to tell me you're not getting the weekly emails and information, and that's, I'm working now without a personal assistant. Used to have a personal assistant, and she retired, and so now I'm trying to figure out how to work MailChimp and add names to it, and the monkey comes up and just looks at me. He just starts laughing and pointing a finger. So I haven't figured it out, and everybody who's doing it through the website, they're still waiting for it to transfer. So let me know personally if you're not getting these emails, because I want you to be aware of what's going on now and in the coming weeks, which is really important. Secondly, then, there's an opportunity for you to do offerings as well as online, as well as in here. Please do that. During our time of just sort of fist bumping and elbow bumping and all, y'all can come forward and drop it in the back basket or drop it up here in this basket if you have an offering in your card as well. We'd appreciate that. Then, if you are visiting, because I see a couple of visitors here, if you're visiting with us, if you're visiting online, let me know. Give me an address. I'll get this to you. But in the back, we have some special tumblers that we would love for you to have, just as a way of saying thanks for visiting with us and joining in this morning. And they're great tumblers, too. So you'll love those. But they're in the back, and Marty in the back will help out as well if you want that. Then let's see what else I want to say. Yard signs. Anybody putting up a yard sign yet? Okay. That's all right. I only had 6 of them back there, so some of you aren't here. Some of them that got them aren't here this morning, and I know they're putting them up, and Linda and I have ours up there. The church has the church as a whole, all the different worship services are sponsoring this. No one walks alone at First United Methodist Church. We're part of the First United Methodist Church. We're an unusual part of First United Methodist Church, and we're participating in this whole reality of inviting others to be a part of this wider definition of what it means to be in community, what it means to be a part of the kingdom of God, and how we reach out to one another. So I'm inviting you all to do that too. I don't have any more back here. You can drive around to the other side of the church if you like, or come in during the week, and they have them inside the west door and pick up that sign. We're going to be doing this for a few more weeks, so I invite you to put that out there. Then, several of you have been asking, we are going to do a trip to Scotland. Well, we think. We are going to do a trip to Scotland again. We did 2 trips to Ireland. We've been on a hiatus, of course, because of COVID and such, but we're hoping this year to do the trip in August of 2022, and it'll be the first couple of weeks of August. That's the plan. So if you're interested, let me know. We've got about a dozen people so far that are interested. I'll be working with my friend Jay Staley, the Labyrinth designer who travels around the world, designs labyrinths, and we will be participating in doing one of those when we get to Scotland somewhere. Of course, all this is coming together, and so we'll probably have about 25 people, and we'd love to have you join if you're interested. We'll go to Edinburgh. We'll at least spend 1 or 2 nights at the International Fringe Festival, and then we'll either travel to Skye or to Iona, and on the way there, go across a number of monastic sites and such. So it's going to be a fun trip. Let me know if you're interested. Finally, will you throw up that slide for me? There's a fine line between saying too much, saying too little, and I walk that line like a drunken clown at a circus. Y'all know that's true about me, right? Minus the drunken part, but it seems that way sometimes. Like, where in the heck is he going with all this? We're going to have some fun this morning, and I use that as my disclaimer. But we are going to have some fun because I want to speak with you about the parable of the prodigal son, which is a misnomer for this parable in the first place. But I have learned so much in looking at this parable again, and I want us to think about what that means, what this parable really means. To do that, I want you to think about right now where you are, how you are feeling now in just this moment. We'll come back to that. How have you been feeling this week? past couple of weeks, but this past week, as everything continues to culminate, as the news abroad overseas strikes us in the face, as we are sort of stricken in the face with people around us as we move from place to place, some of us in masks, some of us not in masks, how are you feeling right now? And then this morning, and in thinking about that, what is this? How are you feeling? How is it with your soul then? And what's the difference? What does that even mean to think about how we're feeling, how it is with our soul? What I want to suggest is that what I discovered about this parable and what we're going to explore for the next several weeks about this parable has changed the way in which I see my relationship to you and to others and to myself. So I invite you to participate in that with us. So glad that you're here this morning. So glad that you're online. Brad, let's kick it off with some music.
1111 downtown, would you stand and sing with us right now? This is a classic 1111 song, Healing River. Super easy. Everything I sing, you just echo it back. Okay, y'all ready? Right here like this. Oh, healing river.
Oh, healing river.
Send down your waters.
Send down your waters.
Send down your waters.
Send down your waters.
Upon this land.
Upon this land.
Oh, healing river.
Oh, healing river.
Send down your waters.
Send down your waters.
And wash the blood.
And wash the blood.
From off of the sands.
From off of the sand.
This land is parching.
This land is parching.
This land is burning.
This land is burning.
No seed is growing
No seed is growing.
in the barren ground.
The barren ground.
Oh, healing river.
Oh, healing river.
Send down your waters.
Send down your waters.
Oh, healing river.
Oh, healing river.
Send your waters down.
Send your waters down.
Uh-huh. All right. Another verse right here. Let the seeds of freedom
The seeds of freedom
awake and flourish.
awake and flourish.
Let the deep roots nourish.
Let the deep roots nourish.
Let the tall stalks rise.
Tall stalks
Oh,
rise.
healing river.
Oh, healing river.
Send down your waters.
Send down your waters.
Oh, healing river.
Oh, healing river.
From out of the sky.
Come out of the sky.
From out of the sky.
Come out of the sky.
Strong work, everybody. I think we can offer one another a sign of peace if you're just careful. Is that cool? We'll just take a moment and offer one another a sign of peace. When y'all are done visiting, you can just have a seat.
Can you hear me okay back in the back? Hi. It's good to see everyone in person today. It's been a while. If you're like me, you've been enjoying the past several months, almost year, of everything being online. So it feels such a privilege to see all your faces today, even though you're wearing masks, but it's nice to see you guys. So if you would, join me in the saying of the welcome candle as we welcome everyone, because the welcome candle is lit. The welcome candle. The welcome candle. Come, come, whoever you are, wanderer, worshiper, lover of leaving, it doesn't matter. Ours is not a caravan of despair. Come, even if you have broken your vows 1,000 times, come yet again.
We've been testing you, and you failed. To see how long that you could sit with the truth, but you failed. I don't think you even recognize the loss of control. I don't think you even see it in yourself. See, every one of us is counting dice that we didn't roll, and the loser is the last to ask for help. Be afraid, be very afraid, but do it anyway. Do it anyway. The stage belongs to you. You feel like a star. You can bark and snap like a dog at the man who just tuned your guitar. I don't think you even recognize the kid in the wings. I don't think you even see her in yourself. She looks to you to what to do with all her delicate dreams. You're too terrified to be of any help. Be afraid, be very afraid, but do it anyway. Do it anyway. Be afraid, be very afraid, but do it anyway. Do it anyway. We don't take requests, we don't shut up and sing. You can tell the truth enough, you find it rhymes with everything. We've been testing you, and you failed. To see how long that you could hold it, and before you screamed, you only exhaled. I don't think you even recognize the sound of your voice when it's blasting through the speakers in the sky. And if your words aren't after nothing, then you're making a choice. Sing a cover when we need a battle cry. Be afraid, be very afraid, but do it anyway. Do it anyway. Be afraid, be very afraid, but do it anyway. We do it anyway. Be afraid, be very afraid, but do it anyway. We do it anyway. Be afraid, be very afraid, but do it anyway. Do it anyway.
When the order was sent out and I saw that the song Be Afraid was right before I was supposed to stand up and pray, I thought it was so appropriate. I'm kidding. You don't have to be scared. I do have a question for you, and this is a question that requires an outward answer from anyone who wants to answer here. And those of you at home, please answer it yourself as well. But tell me something good. What is something good that happened to you this week or this morning? S'mores. S'mores are always good. Vacation is a very, very good thing on multiple levels as well. S'mores are as well. What else is something good? Walking a dog? Yeah. That's always a good, pets are such good therapy. Such good therapy. Yeah, you. Helpful friends, both here and in church and wherever we are. People that we know we can trust and who are very helpful. Jimmy? Long time out of town guests. Those are good too. A stranger thanked Tom for wearing his mask. That's a good thing. That's a very good thing. And now, what'd you say? Now it's his new best friend. So Tom has a new best friend. Hallelujah. What was that? A birthday. That's a good one too. Okay, so in the midst of all of these things, I want you to hold on to those because we have to hold on to the good. Because this week we've seen the hurricane of last week with so much devastation. We saw on the news people holding on to their houses as they floated away and ran into cars. We saw 13 of our men and women be killed in Afghanistan, with so many others who were also killed trying to escape, so many who are in hiding, so many who are very, very afraid. We now see Hurricane Ida. I spoke with a volunteer from my organization this morning who lives in South Louisiana, and I said, "How are you? Where are you?" She said, "We're still at home. We're preparing to leave. Our house will not survive this." She said, "You know when you're young and stupid and you build the house that you've dreamed of, you don't think of building a house to survive a Category 4 hurricane." And so we think of all of those, whether they have evacuated or not, who are in the midst of facing things that are completely out of their control, whether it's a hurricane or not. And so how do we live in the tension of the good and the not so good? The things that we can control and the things that we cannot. It is scary, and we are often afraid. But may we hold to not just the fear, but the possibility of all that is. May we pray. O Holy One, one that is of love and peace, in a time of uncertainty, of continued war, of natural disasters, of times in which we argue over things such as wearing a mask or not, and being vaccinated or not. We try to find our way when we are afraid. But may the fear not paralyze us. May the fear propel us to action in a way that brings us together to where we know we can trust one another and that we can help one another in the midst of the differences, in the midst of the things that seem so huge and uncertain. May we find our way together, knowing that we are never alone. We pray these things in the name of the one in whom we live and move and have our being. Amen.
So I have asked Penny Armstrong to join us this morning and to give us an update. Some of you may have realized that you received a survey. Did anybody notice they got a survey in the mail? Some of you did? Okay. Now those of you who didn't get anything, you didn't notice it because it came at 12 a.m. in the morning. You might not have read your email at that early in the morning or seen it if you piled up during the day. So we're going to send it out again a couple of times. If you still aren't getting it, you need to let me know, and that way I can make sure that I can get that survey to you about this part of our 1111 study, and I'm going to ask Penny to continue and share some thoughts about that, where we are with it.
Thank you, Tom. I'm going to just wipe this out out of respect for everybody. I'm so delighted to have been given the opportunity to do this survey and the chance I've had to meet some of you on a more personal level that I hadn't had before. I've always known this is an enlightened group. I've always known that people who come to this service are people who really look at different ways of looking at life, and in that spectrum of life, how they perceive their relationship with what is beyond this life. The chance to do these surveys has really shown me that, and again, thank you to the people who've been willing to take the time to do that. For those of you who did not participate in the one-on-one survey, or those of you interviews, or those of you who had hoped to and it didn't work out with timing or whatever, there is a point at the very end of the survey, a last question, that allows you to fill in anything else you want them to know. So please feel good about getting that and using that. The survey did go out 2 nights ago, I think, at midnight, which was awesome. It's SurveyMonkey. There are 22 questions, I think, on it. It takes about 10 minutes to fill out, but space for comments if you want to add those comments, which would add the amount of time. When it's finished, it comes back to us, to me and Elizabeth. It was her SurveyMonkey that we used to do this, and we began compiling data. The survey will be out there for 2 weeks. At the end of 2 weeks, we'll shut down the survey and we'll start putting data together. If you did not receive the survey, please let us know. We sent out a list of email addresses that we understood were current. We might not have the right one for you. Secondly, if it came to your household on one email address, one of your people you live with, but not to the other person, let us know, because we want to hear from each person. That means send us the other email address and you'll get it as well. If you participated in the one-on-one, you absolutely are invited to also do the survey. Several people have asked me about that. Email address to send your address to, I'm going to give it to you right now, but Tom will also post it perhaps in his weekly updates. My email address is doc, D-O-C, first 3 letters of doctor, doc, Penny Armstrong @gmail.com. Real simple. Doc, D-O-C, Penny Armstrong @gmail.com. Yes, Miss Wills.
I just want to remind you that if you check your spam folder or your junk folder, in case, because if SurveyMonkey isn't okay, I'll give you the things you haven't received it. Should have by now, you're on the mailing, so just double check your spam folder before you
Okay, Elizabeth Wills just said check your spam folder if you didn't receive it. Sometimes it goes in there if it doesn't recognize where it came from. Okay. Third thing I wanted to say, okay, ends in 2 weeks. Then I'll be putting it all together. I'm expecting the report to be ready the end of September. I'll be giving the report to church leadership. I also will be coming back here and giving it to you. I think if you participated, you certainly deserve to read what our findings were. Let me say, and then I'll stop, more than anything, what's coming out of the survey as I'm beginning to compile data is how important this service is to First United Methodist. I didn't doubt it. You're confirming that. How much Tom and the band are loved in the hard work that's done here. It's important that that's acknowledged. And also, again, third, and I already mentioned this, the kind of people who are participants here. How committed you are to understanding on a more deep and meaningful level of what faith life means. So thank you for your cooperation, your participation. I'm really excited about this, and I'm excited to share it with you in about a month. Thanks.
Thank you, Penny, and thanks for all the hard work that you've been doing on this. She provides such great leadership and help to me in putting this together. And we have about 560 people on our email list, of course, but that's true for all of these kinds of communities. So large a list, and people are very tangentially participatory or infrequently or whatnot. And this list has been purged, by the way. But there's probably about 200 or so that are active in some kind of ongoing way. And so we want to hear from everybody that's had some involvement with it, because this is your community, this is your spiritual training, if you will. This is how, if you're like me, we experience our connection to the world by coming here as community and kind of remembering who we are in relationship to one another, to ourselves, to God, to the whole community. So we want to hear your voice and your ideas as well. So, all right, thank you, Penny, for doing that. I want to take a moment to invite us, before we sing this next song, into something we haven't been doing as much of because of the nature and logistics of how we're doing worship right now, kind of in a hybrid fashion. But I want to invite you online, at home, or wherever you are. I know some of you are out on a lake on a boat, so I want to invite you to do that there. But I want to invite you to take just a moment, close your eyes with me, and to find as relaxed a state as you can. And just to invite you to take a deep breath and then to let it out slowly. If you take a deep breath in, count to 5, and when you let your breath out, just let it be to 8. Just slowly let it out. And to do that 3 times, in breath and exhale. We forget how important breathing is because we take it for granted. Just like we take for granted the very ground of our being at times. So that when we find ourselves in the presence of distressing news or a distressing person or a distressing situation, we forget that we are already grounded in the same love and the same being that everyone else in this moment is grounded in. And sometimes it's helpful just to take a deep breath and focus on letting it out slowly. And the minute we do that, we have already stepped back from reacting to being more present to what else is there.
I want to invite all you good folks to sing this next song with us. And you people out there on the lake, on the boat, need to sing with us too. Some words from Rumi that have been set to music. Out beyond ideas of wrongdoing and right doing, there is a field, I'll meet you there. Out beyond ideas of wrongdoing and right doing, there is a field, I'll meet you there. Now the verse. And the soul lies down in that grass. The world is too full to talk about ideas and language, even the phrase each other, well, it doesn't make any sense. Now the chorus. Out beyond ideas of wrongdoing and right doing, there is a field, I'll meet you there. One more time. Beyond ideas of wrongdoing and right doing, there is a field, I'll meet you there. And the verse again. and the soul lies down in that grass. The world is too full to talk about ideas and language. We'll even the phrase each other. It doesn't make any sense. Out beyond ideas of wrongdoing and right doing, there is a feeling I'll meet you there. One more time. Out beyond ideas of wrongdoing and right doing, there is a feeling I'll meet you there. There's a feeling. There is a feeling I'll meet you there.
To start off thinking about this story and just how strange this story was for Jesus' listeners at the time that he told this story, the story of the prodigal son, I want to tell you this joke that I've told many times before. The Jewish tradition has in its most conservative tradition called the Hasidic faith, something started around the 17th century by Rabbi Baal Shem Tov. What's interesting about this very traditional, very orthodox kind of orientation is that there's a whole collection of stories that arose out of it that are quite self-deprecating and humorous stories about themselves. And so I love these stories because of the way in which they remind us to laugh at ourselves. But in the process of laughing at even some of the most difficult things, perhaps we open up the doors for understanding something else we're not seeing in our defensiveness, or in our normal state of ego-ness where we go to hide or to defend or to protect. So here's a story from the Min of Kelm. In Kelm, it so happened that one day there was a thief. Now this thief had come out of nowhere, it appears. This thief was stealing things in the town of Kelm, a town where everyone knows everyone else, a town where there was an openness and a shared friendliness and a trust amongst everyone. And yet there was a thief in the town. Well, everyone was disgusted. This thief was taking things. This thief was so brazen, this thief was taking things in broad daylight. And so finally the people came together and they said something must be done. And they began to mistrust one another, of course. And so they searched hard and long and far and wide to try to find this thief. Finally, they figured it out. They called everyone together, and the leaders, they came together as a council, and they brought the suspect in front of them. It was the blacksmith. The blacksmith has been the one stealing everything from everyone else. And so one by one, the crowd began to sing. "Hang the blacksmith," they shouted. "We must have justice. Hang the blacksmith." And there was such a fervor and a roar among the community when finally somebody in the community started looking at someone else and said, "But wait a minute. We only have one blacksmith. If we hang our blacksmith, we won't have a blacksmith." There was a dead silence in the crowd when suddenly someone else snapped up and said, "We have two bakers. Hang one of the bakers." I've told this joke hundreds of times. Linda has told this joke, loves to tell this joke, and in all of that telling, I only realized something very recently as I thought about it. It speaks to what we do, I think, sometimes as adults, but even more, I think, as adolescents, as adults who don't recognize we really haven't grown up yet. We really haven't matured yet. Because the idea that's in that story is this idea that we often see in our community around us, and that I'm going to suggest that even you and I have done from time to time, that we will often resort to self-destruction before facing the truth about our sense of what seems to be missing, or about our lack of understanding what is integrative and what brings about wholeness. We will oftentimes even resort to self-destruction. Think of all of the habitual patterns that we live out of and all of the patterns that we see in our community around us. Somehow, we believe that it's easier to undermine our very existence rather than to work toward our integration or wholeness. Jokes have a way of revealing hidden truths or unspoken deceits. Parables, like jokes, like folk tales, like mythic tales, have a way of doing that because they speak to something very central and truthfully very simplistic, very simple, that is true for all of us as human beings. And one such story is the parable of the prodigal son, which, as I said earlier, is a misleading name because there's no use of the word prodigal in the story whatsoever. Jesus never uses the word prodigal. None of the writers and readers or tellers of the story back then or even since used the word prodigal. Somewhere along the line, the word prodigal started being used. That's your homework, by the way, for this week. I forgot to look that up myself. Where did that even begin? I know what it's rooted in, and I'll tell you that in just a second. In the end, what is important about this story is to find out what it can mean for us 2,000 years later after it was first recorded. Now, in its context, just to remind you, it comes from the Gospel of Luke. And I'm assuming we all know the prodigal son. We'll get to the text in a little while. But I'm assuming you understand that it's the story of the younger son who leaves his father and then asks for his inheritance and abandons the father and his older brother and goes off and lives his life and kind of falls by the wayside in ruin, realizes his mistake, comes back, apologizes, begins to apologize. The father's already running out to meet him. It's all happy. They throw a festival, a celebration. They kill the fatted calf, and the older brother is wondering why he never got a party. Right? That's the gist of what we might remember as the story. It's in the context of two other stories called Lost and Found stories, two other parables. The lost sheep. One sheep is lost. The shepherd leaves the 99 to go find the one. So there's 1 in 100. Then the second story is the lost coin. 1 out of 10, one coin is missing. The widow goes and leaves everything to find the one coin. That everything matters. It's just finding that one coin and celebrates having found that one coin, 1 in 10. And now we have 1 in 2. Now we have a lost son. But this is where Amy Jill Levine says that we missed the story altogether because it's really not about the sons or the father, but something much bigger. And I'm going to be reading, using a couple of stories or a couple of resources to help with this. So I'm going to mention them right now so I don't forget to mention them, because I invite you to go check these out. Now, I know that you're not likely to go do this, but I know a few of you will go and pursue this because you're very intellectual academic types. Nothing you'd rather do than go bury yourself in an academic book all week long. So I'm going to invite you to go do that. Or get the audiobook and listen. These are not all that academic. But this one, Saving God from Religion by Robin Myers, is a fascinating, fun book. It's actually very readable, and I think it's where a lot of us are. I'm going to be relying on this to some degree, Saving God from Religion. The other one that I think will be a book for us to savor and think about for the rest of our lives as we move through the climate crisis that we're in is called The More Beautiful World That Our Hearts Know Is Possible. The More Beautiful World Our Hearts Know Is Possible. I'm going to look at these two over the next few weeks. Also, Amy Jill Levine has a wonderful book called Short Stories Jesus Told. And it's more academic. So if you're going to read that one, you're going to find yourself during the day with a big cup of coffee and take notes. Short Stories Jesus Told. But I'll be thinking through that one and using some of that as well. And in this series, by the way, Linda McDermott's going to be joining me. Reverend Linda will join me on a couple of these Sundays, and we'll have some dialogue. A lot of you have mentioned how much you enjoyed are having conversations and what she brings to the table different from what I bring to the table. So she's going to come and we're going to have some conversations around this particular story as well. If Jesus told two enigmatic stories that truly summarize what he was about, they were the Good Samaritan, which is a story we're not sure that Jesus actually told, as clearly we think he did, but then scholars pretty much agree across the board. The prodigal son and the other two lost and found stories are in fact stories that he probably did tell that eventually got written down and passed along. So it's interesting that these stories provide some of the central ideas for what Jesus is all about. And the problem for us is that we know the stories too well. So for example, throw up a couple of these images here. throughout history, you can look this up. If you go look up how many books have been written about the prodigal son, I stopped it at 60. I stopped the count at 60. It just kept going. If you look at how many paintings have been painted representative of the prodigal son story, dozens and dozens throughout history. This one is one of the most famous. This is Rembrandt's painting of the prodigal son. And well, of course, what's interesting is always how they're interpreted for the time, right? Sometimes they'll try to create a scenario that represents that time, first century Middle Eastern culture. But in most cases, it's depicting the current situation, the current cultural setting. So this is Rembrandt's portrayal of the prodigal son and the elder son off to the side. Then the next one, Jorge Coco is a modern, he's actually a Mormon artist, a Spanish artist, and this was his rendering of the prodigal son, which I love. It's modern color kind of portrayal. If you go online, you'll find hundreds. Next week, I'll show you some others that are even more interesting, and then I'll show you some others as we get into the third week that are far more abstract, but I think speak more generally to what's at the core of these stories. The problem for us is that Augustine, back in the 4th century, 3rd, 4th century, St. Augustine of I believe of Hippo, was one of the early bishops of the Catholic Church, of the Christian Church. He became one of the formative sort of leading thinkers of the early Christianity. There were multiple thinkers, right? Just like today, multiple ways of looking at this same idea of spirituality, God at the heart of things. What does it mean to be Christian? Multiple perspectives. Some went out because of simply power struggles. Augustine's orientation of original sin became a dominant interpretation of our relationship to the divine. I think it's wrong. I'm not alone in that. But this idea of original sin, that from Adam and Eve was sin, and they broke the covenant, and then from that point on, everyone else has sinned since then. To be human is to live in sin, and only through the sacrifice of Jesus do we then find our way to God. It's an old narrative that began with Bishop Augustine. It didn't begin with Jesus, and it's not in this story. What Jesus is doing in this story is reminding his hearers, the Pharisees, that's what these 3 parables of lost and found are all about, reminding them why he would even take the time to eat with people that everybody else has excluded. People who are lame, who are crippled, who are injured, who are disabled, people who are imperfect in all sorts of other ways, people who are sinners because of their nationality, their ethnic background, women who are thought of basically as property from a very dominant patriarchal orientation of religion, and sinners like tax collectors who he happened to be having dinner with at the very beginning of this whole series. And the Pharisees were going like, why are you doing this kind of stuff? And so he tells the 3 stories. It is not about you and I and our individual sin, and only when we recognize what miserable people we are and we confess that to God and then pray that Jesus would please save our miserable selves so that we can have our ticket to heaven, it's nothing about that. But then what is it about? So I want to tell you a couple of things, first of all. A couple of things I want to get on the table. The first one is that we understand and think in terms of myth, all right? I've talked about this before. The mythic language of the Bible, like the mythic language of most of culture then, was an understanding that everything was sort of imbued with divine providence or divine participation. So rocks would cry out with God. Burning bushes would be signs of God. We've lost that now because we're more oriented towards what's called logos, which is the Greek word for reason or logic. You already see it in the Gospel of John as a more Gnostic influence begins to take over, and you have some of that idea of the logos. This idea that word that becomes written or word that is spoken and the ability to reason becomes predominant. Well, with science, that has pretty much taken over, and our Western material world sees everything as either or, as materialistic and as spiritual, as separate. Because that's the only way that makes sense to us, because we see the material as cause and effect, as what's proven, as what's right in front of us. Like that table, hard as a rock, if I hit it, it's not moving anywhere. What we don't realize that quantum physics is already telling us is that in fact it's moving all over the place. That the atoms and the energy between the atoms and the space between that energy, which we have no idea what that is rapidly moving and disappearing and reappearing in all sorts of crazy ways. But because we think what we see has to be what is there, that we have this material orientation, then we are left to think in terms of what is spiritual as removed from us. And therefore, the only way to get there is through something like a sacrifice. We continue to see things as separate, as binary, and we read this story in the same way, and I think it's a mistake. So, the other thing that I want you to get, besides learning that there's a mythic way of understanding reality that I think is the truer way, as my uncle would say, don't ever let the facts get in the way of truth. Fiction oftentimes tells more truth than fact, and I realize that that's an awkward thing to say these days, because now we have truth being made up right and left. Well, I shouldn't say that. We have facts being made up right and left. We don't have truth being made up. Truth doesn't change. It becomes something that we have to participate in that's revealed to us. So that's the first thing, learning to see in mythic language. The second thing is the word prodigal, which we'll come back to and think about. But this word prodigal, what do we think of it? When I say prodigal, what do you think of? Lavish. Okay. What else? Wasteful. What? Not following the rules. Okay. We think of what the guy does as meaning prodigal. He breaks the rules. He spends lavishly. He wastes what he's inherited from his father, right? We think of prodigal as meaning wasteful. But in fact, prodigal means, it actually comes from the root word which means abundance. It means overflowing. It means a profusion of. So that you have the words prodigious, or you have the word prodigy. Prodigal, in fact, doesn't mean what we think it means in this story. It means a profound profusion of something in the midst of where they are, and everybody is missing it. Did you hear that? Prodigal means there's something at the very heart, in the midst of all of them, right there where they are, just as right here where we are, just as right where we are in the rest of the world. There's a profusion of something, an abundance of something. Let's call it a wastefulness of something, and everybody's missing it. That's what I think this story is about. As I was thinking about this story, I was reminded of a myth, and I'm going to share it with you very quickly, because I think it speaks to this. And we're going to finish. I'm going to finish with this little myth, and then one final thought, because I realize we've already gotten ourselves to 12 o'clock here. There's a story that I learned when I was at the International Festival in Ireland. And a teller from India told this story. It's a very simple little story, classic with all myths, typical to all myths. It's a very simple framework. There was a woman who wanted a child in a small village. She wanted the child so desperately. But when she gave birth to the child, it was only half a child. It was half a boy. It had only the right side. It had one eye on the right. It had half the mouth. It had half the nose. It had an ear. It had a right arm and a right leg. There was no left side. And so they called the child Half-Boy. And Half-Boy was hard to live with. Not simply because he was difficult to look at, but he was not very happy. Nor was the mother particularly happy. And eventually, no one really understood what was going on, and the conflict grew and grew and grew, and the village itself began to fall apart. Now, I want to remind you to not think of this story as a literal story. What's missing in your life? What part of you is still halfway not really discovered? What part of you and what part of our culture is really still broken and missing? What half is still unseen? So Half-Boy went about the town and the village trying to live, but nothing seemed to work as he lived out of his own angst and his own dysfunction until finally he left the village. After a while, he wandered to another village, and he came to this village, and they said, "We don't want you here either, but you might find something out by the lake." So he went walking out to the lake. Now, when he found this lake, he saw something coming towards him. And as he squinted his right eye, because that's all he had was the right eye, as he squinted the right eye, he began to notice, okay, now I'm being funny. He began to notice that it was another half person. And to his delight, it was the other half. Well, now wait. He thought it was the other half. It was a left arm, a left eye, a left mouth, left nostril, left leg, left, there was the left side. When they found each other, you would think this would be just perfect. They'd just meet up and they'd go walk off. They got into an argument. Then they got into a wrestling match. Then they fell into the water, and the water began to thrash all about until it was stirring up. The dust, the water, everything was thrashing about until they disappeared beneath the surface of the water. Nobody saw anything for a time. And then after a while, a whole person came up out of the water. But this person was completely disoriented. Had no idea exactly where they were. They knew they were whole, but they had no idea where they were. They didn't understand why they were there. And so the people in the village said, well, you need to go back where it started. And when he went back, what he found was an elderly man at the village. And this elderly man had 1 foot in the village and 1 foot outside the village, sort of straddling what was kind of the line there. There was no real obvious line, and yet we know there were lines, right? We feel the boundaries. We know where they are. There's nothing really there. But there he was straddling this boundary that seemed to be there, and he said, if you want to come in, you have to come in with me. And together we have to dance as we go in. So they crossed over this boundary and they began to dance, and as they danced in the village, everyone else around them began to join in the dance together. Now that's a strange story, admittedly, and because we are such literal people, we have a hard time hearing strange stories. We tend to want to plug them in. We tend to want to paint them exactly as we saw them. So it's hard to see a half boy. It's not hard to realize there's half of us missing. It's not hard to realize that something seems broken in our culture or in our world. It's not hard to realize that sometimes we don't feel as if we're all together here. But if we think about the story, what the water might represent, where do we find ourselves sometimes in the darkest places and the biggest struggles? Whether it's addiction to fear, whether it's addiction to our defensiveness, whether it's addiction to our ego, whether it's addiction to drugs because we no longer are even aware of our ego, we're now just trying to numb the pain. If it's an addiction to our side or our point of view, and we can't get out beyond ideas. The water represents something where we find ourselves, and how do we come out of that? So what we're going to talk about in the next couple of weeks is exactly what this idea is that the prodigal son speaks to, that is more than simply repenting of our sin so that God will forgive us and we can find our ticket to heaven. But what if, in fact, as I've read in a Harper's Magazine article this week, where the author said, most of us think there's 2 forces in the world, good and evil, and he argued there's a third that's called stupidity, and I'm arguing that they're all wrong. Do you get that? Do you get that yet? They're all wrong. As long as we think there's good and evil in the world and stupidity, we're still playing with that boundary. We're still thinking there's a line there. We're still thinking in terms of half boy, and they're the wrong half and we're the right half. But what the prodigal son realizes, what that story reminds us, is that when he comes back, it has nothing to do with the prodigal son or the father. It's the elder son who's forgotten that it never was good and evil. It never was simply stupidity. There's only 2 ways to see the world. Either we are all interconnected and we are grounded in the being and, God, and love of God, or we're not. That's what Jesus' story is trying to tell us. A father had 2 sons. One said, give me all that I'm owed. Give me my inheritance. And he left and squandered it. And when he found himself at the bottom of the barrel in a pig pen, feeding the pigs, he thought to himself, I could go home and it would be better off for me there because at least I could be a servant. And when he returns, his father is running out to him. Before the son can even finish his confession, he says, I'm so glad you are back. And he tells his servants, find the calf, kill the fatted calf. We're throwing a feast because now my son who was lost is found. And the elder son looks on and says, that's not right. I've been here all the time. I've always been doing good stuff. I've always been doing what you expect. I've always been living the way I'm supposed to. Where's my party? And the father says, you've been a part of my inheritance, my life, this kingdom all along. But this was broken and lost, and now it's found. Mary Oliver's quote here is our final little image I want to throw up. Band, y'all can come on up here. What Mary Oliver's poem reminds me of, Mary Oliver, who I consider sort of the saint of the agnostic atheism, realizes that there is no line, that in fact we are all interconnected. It's only a matter of paying attention and speaking to that connection every chance we get. And she says it's a serious thing just to be alive on this fresh morning in this broken world. I wonder if we can begin to start seeing those moments where we encounter the brokenness by first remembering our connectedness. And rather than seeing good and evil in the world and stupidity, which we're tempted to do, why don't we begin to see, how can I tell the story that you belong to me better and that I belong to you? Amen.
Could you be a window in a darkened hall? lost are looking for.
Telling DeAndrea before as that first song was being sung, "Be Afraid," and I was just listening to the lyrics, looking at the lyrics, and thinking, "Oh my gosh, I didn't realize just how much that song spoke to the prodigal son, to the parable of the prodigal son." And then as I'm listening to the song here at the end, I mean, when Brad and I get together on Monday and we think about this, we're going like, "Yeah, I think it'll work." And then somehow Spirit works and it all falls together, and we begin to realize the connections. That's really what this is about. It's about recognizing that we are not separate. We are all interconnected. Yes, we go through pain. Yes, we experience brokenness. Yes, we experience challenges, of course. And we lean into one another when we need time to remember that we are, in fact, still a part of the whole picture. We need that. But we can't forget that, especially in the rest of the world still thinks there's just good and evil. So we get to be the windows. It's not could you be, you are. You are the windows that everyone else sees themselves. And you see yourself in everyone else. So it's not could you be, it's really you are. Now can you live up to it, I guess? Maybe. Can we remember it? Can we practice it? So let's stand up for our benediction. It's a simple one this morning. It's a little scary out there. It's a little scary in here sometimes. So yeah, be afraid. But do it anyway. Amen.